Your mother doesn't belong here. This is our home. Stephanie's words sliced through the thin wall like razor wire. I froze in the dim hallway, hand clutching my makeshift cane, feeling every one of my 67 years drag me down. My own son and his wife, arguing about me as if I were some inconvenient, forgotten piece of furniture. I hobbled back to the guest room, the one Stephanie daily reminded me would soon be her office. I sank onto the twin bed, the ache from my fall still throbbing in my hip. On the nightstand, Arthur's photo smiled up at me. 5 years without him, and the loneliness had never weighed heavier. "What do I do now, old man?" I whispered to the portrait. Through the crack in the door, I saw my grandkids race by. Ethan, all long 7-year-old legs, and Chloe, a 4-year-old whirlwind with golden curls. They had no idea Grandma was right there, swallowing tears. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind replayed every ignored sign from the past months. Stephanie's distant gaze, the dishes she'd rewash after I'd already done them, the kids' clothes she'd refold once I'd put them away. The cornbread, made from my mother's treasured recipe, rejected and left to molder in the fridge. "We're watching their sugar," she'd said, but I'd seen the processed snacks stashed in the pantry the very next day. The next morning, hip still screaming, I packed my few belongings into my small suitcase. When Jason came out of the shower and saw me ready to leave, his face just fell apart. "Mom, you don't have to go yet. The doctor said you need more time." "I'm better, son. I can manage." Stephanie appeared in the doorway, still in her bathrobe, a barely hidden wave of relief washing over her eyes. "Are you sure, Brenda? We wouldn't want you to feel pressured." Her voice was polite, as always, but the expectation beneath it was a tremor she couldn't quite still. "I'm sure. You've already helped me more than enough." Jason insisted on driving me. In the car, he tried to apologize without ever quite saying for what. "Stephanie's just stressed with work. The kids are a handful. The house is small for everyone." "You don't need to explain, son. I understand." But the truth was, I didn't understand. That house, that beautiful 2-story place in a gated community, existed only because I'd sold the home Arthur and I had built over a lifetime. The down payment had come from me, from my savings, from my sacrifice. But that, it seemed, was a forgotten detail. You must be wondering how I got here. How a mother and grandmother could be treated like a nuisance in the very home she helped buy. It all started 5 years ago, when Arthur left. A sudden heart attack snatched away the man I'd shared 42 years with. One day we were planning a trip to Florida. The next I was picking out his burial suit. Our house became too big for a lone widow. 3 bedrooms, a yard, that spacious kitchen where I'd cooked Sunday dinners for the whole family. Memories echoed through the empty rooms. Every corner held a piece of our history. It was Jason who suggested I sell. "Mom, why stay in that huge house? It's too much for you to take care of by yourself." He had a point, of course, but there was something else in his eyes when he talked about the sale. A glint of something hungry. When I mentioned I was considering selling, he and Stephanie appeared the very next Sunday with floor plans, brochures for gated communities, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. "Look, Mom, there's this new development. Safe, lots of trees, close to our place." It wasn't really close to their place. It was the community they'd always dreamed of living in. I sold our home for a good price. I bought a small, comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. And yes, I gave Jason the money for the down payment on the 2-story house in their dream community. It wasn't a loan. It was a gift. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We sacrifice for our children. At first, everything seemed fine. I'd visit on Sundays, bring homemade treats the kids adored. Ethan always bolted into my arms. Chloe, still so tiny, would call me Grandma Benda, with that sweet little voice that melted my heart. Stephanie was polite, always offered coffee, asked about my week. But there was a look in her eyes, a distance I couldn't bridge, like an invisible pane of glass between us. The first changes were subtle. Sunday invitations grew rarer. Always an engagement, a kid's party, a friend's birthday. This weekend won't work, Brenda. The kids have swim lessons Sunday morning, and in the afternoon, we're going to Jason's parents' place. Jason's parents? My husband was an only child and his parents had passed years ago. I noticed the slip but pretended not to. Stephanie colored slightly, correcting herself. I meant me parents. When I called to talk to the grandkids, the conversation was always rushed. They're busy right now, Brenda. Homework. Oi, they're asleep, Brenda. Early school tomorrow. Then came the fall, a silly tumble in my apartment kitchen. The doctor said nothing was broken, but I'd need rest and physical therapy. It was Jason who suggested I stay with them temporarily. Mom, how are you going to manage alone? Come to our place, at least until you can walk properly. I watched Stephanie's expression freeze for a split second before she forced a smile. Of course, Brenda. It'll be good for the kids to have Grandma around. I packed a small bag and went. The guest room had a twin bed and an old wardrobe. The walls were bare, save for a shelf stacked with document boxes. Stephanie was already planning the office it would become. Sorry about the clutter, Brenda. We don't use this room much. The first few days were tense, but I tried to help any way I could. Even in pain, I insisted on small chores. Folding laundry fresh from the dryer, organizing the pantry, trying to make myself useful so I wouldn't be a burden. That's when I noticed the pattern. Everything I did, Stephanie would redo. As if my work wasn't good enough. As if I were invading her territory. One morning I made coffee while everyone was still asleep. When Stephanie came down and saw the table set, her smile never reached her eyes. You didn't have to go to all that trouble, Brenda. We have our routine. She poured out the coffee I'd made and brewed a fresh pot. One afternoon, I heard Chloe crying. My grandmotherly instinct took over, and I hobbled to her with my cane. The little one had fallen in the backyard, a scraped knee. I picked her up to comfort her, but Stephanie appeared like a flash. You don't need to, Brenda. I'll take care of my daughter. She practically snatched Chloe from my arms. The emphasis on my was a stinging slap. The message was clear. I might be the grandmother, but I had no rights over those children. The next day, I baked a pan of my mother's cornbread, the one Ethan loved. When the kids came home from school, their eyes lit up at the smell. Grandma's cornbread! Ethan shouted, running into the kitchen. Stephanie intercepted him. Not today, sweetie. You already had treats at school. We're watching your sugar, remember? The cornbread sat untouched. Days later, I found it in the trash, covered in mold. That night, I overheard the argument. Their voices drifted from the kitchen after the kids were in bed. I didn't mean to listen, but the walls were paper thin. She's trying, Steph. She's trying to help. Help? She's taking over my house. She redoes everything I organize, gives the kids treats when she knows I don't want her to, keeps giving opinions on their upbringing. She's my mother, and their grandmother. And I'm your wife. This is our house, not hers. She sold her house. She chose to live alone. She sold it to help us buy this one. A heavy silence fell before her reply. Your mother doesn't belong here. This is our home. That's when I decided it was time to leave. My hip still ached. The doctor had recommended 2 more weeks of rest. But my dignity was worth more than that. Back in my apartment, loneliness was a physical weight. The walls seemed to press in. The silence grew denser. For the first few days, Jason called frequently, checking on me. But the calls dwindled. Visits with the grandkids became rare events, like eclipses. There was always an excuse. Extra classes, parties, unavoidable commitments. Whenever I suggested they come to my apartment, Stephanie always had a reason why it wasn't possible. The kids have swim lessons Saturday morning. Ethan has a test on Monday. He needs to study. Chloe has a bit of a cough. Better not leave the house. The few times I did manage to visit, Stephanie made sure to mention how cramped the house was, how much they needed more space. The old guest room was already officially an office, with a computer desk and bookshelves. No bed there anymore. The message was crystal clear. There was no longer a place for me in that house. One afternoon, alone in my apartment, I looked out the window and saw a flyer at the community center across the street. Painting classes for seniors, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'd never painted before. In fact, I never really had time for hobbies when Arthur was alive. Always busy with the house, with family. Why not? What did I have to lose? At the first class, I held a brush like it was some alien artifact. The teacher, Gloria, a woman in her early 70s with vibrant purple hair and the energy of a teenager, smiled at me. Don't think, Brenda. Just feel. The canvas is a place where you can exist without judgment. Exist without judgment. A revolutionary concept for someone who'd spent her entire life defined as a wife, a mother, a homemaker, and now, an inconvenient grandmother. My first attempts were disastrous. Unformed splotches, clashing colors. But there was something liberating about creating purely for myself. Something that didn't need to be useful or practical. Weeks passed. The hip pains diminished, but I kept going to classes. I started painting landscapes from the countryside where I grew up. My parents' old farm, the creek where we swam in the summer, the gnarled apple tree in the backyard. Memories that the brush transformed into images. You have a real talent, Brenda, Gloria said one day, observing my work. Your landscapes have soul. I laughed at the compliment, but a small flame of pride, long dormant, flickered to life inside me. I turned a corner of my living room into a small, makeshift studio. An old table, brushes and glass jars, canvases stacked against the wall. For the first time since Arthur passed, I woke up with a purpose, with a genuine desire to see the day begin. That's when Gloria mentioned the local art show. The community center is organizing an exhibit for local artists. You should participate, Brenda. Me? But I've only been painting for a few months. So what? Art isn't about time, it's about soul. And your canvases have soul to spare. Reluctantly, I agreed. I chose 3 canvases. The creek from my childhood, the sunset viewed from my parents' porch, and a field of sunflowers that existed only in my memory. On the day of the exhibition, I got ready with care. A blue dress I hadn't worn in years, a subtle lipstick. I looked in the mirror and, for the first time in a long while, I saw more than just a lonely widow. I saw a woman with something to say. What happened at that exhibition would change everything. But that's a story for another time. Because that night, as I prepared to reveal my paintings to the world, my phone rang. It was Jason, his voice so small it took me back to when he was a little boy, confessing he'd broken the living room vase. "Mom, we've got problems. Serious problems." I slowly sank into the nearest chair, my heart heavy. Despite everything, he was my son, my only son. "What happened, Jason?" Silence on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. "Stephanie lost her job 2 months ago. We didn't want to worry you. We thought she'd find something right away, but we're behind on the house payments. It's been 3 months. The bank's threatening to foreclose." 3 months. While I was learning to mix colors and bring my memories to life, they were drowning in debt, and they hadn't told me a thing. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, son?" Another silence. "Stephanie didn't want to. She said we'd figure it out." Of course she didn't. Asking for help from the intrusive mother-in-law who didn't have a place in their home would be admitting defeat. I closed my eyes for a moment, a mix of hurt and worry churning inside me. "Son, come for dinner with me on Saturday. All of you." "Mom, you don't need to worry. I'm just telling you because..." "It's not worry, Jason. It's an invitation. It's been too long since I've seen my grandkids. Come for dinner. I have a surprise for you." I hung up and looked at my small studio. The canvases leaning against the wall. The brushes in their jars. The paint splatters on the floor I could never quite clean. My refuge. My new life. And now, perhaps, the salvation of the house I'd helped them buy. When Saturday arrived, I spent the day preparing. I made pot roast, Jason's favorite since he was a kid. I baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies Ethan adored. I even bought soda, even knowing Stephanie watched their sugar intake. It was my house, my rules. At 7 sharp, the doorbell rang. Jason came in first, hugging me tight. He looked thinner, with deep circles under his eyes. Stephanie followed close behind, her polite smile firmly in place, but her eyes downcast, avoiding my gaze. "Hi, Brenda. Thanks for inviting us." The kids were my bomb. Ethan bolted into my arms like there was no tomorrow. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Where have you been?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. I hadn't vanished. I'd been kept away. Chloe, my little princess, was taller, her golden curls now grazing her shoulders. She hugged my legs tightly. "Grandma Bren, I brought you a drawing." She handed me a sheet of paper with colorful smudges that, according to her, were me and her, making cookies together. I treasured that paper. During dinner, I kept the conversation light. I asked about the kids' school, about Jason's work. I avoided touching on Stephanie's unemployment. She ate in silence, responding only when directly questioned. After dessert, when the kids were already engrossed with the gifts I'd set aside, a puzzle for Ethan and a doll for Chloe, I called everyone to follow me. "I have something to show you." I led them to my small makeshift studio. I saw Jason's eyes widen as he spotted the canvases leaning against the wall, the paint pots, the brushes. "Mom, what is all this?" I smiled, a mix of pride and nervousness. "This is my secret," I said, gesturing to the canvases. "I discovered I can paint." Stephanie looked at the paintings in disbelief. Her eyes landed on the checks and sales receipts I had deliberately left on the table. You sold these paintings?" I nodded, picking up one of the canvases to show it closer. It was a landscape of the creek from my childhood, blue-green waters reflecting the evening sky. I started taking painting classes at the community center. At first, it was just to pass the time, but it seems I have some talent. I participated in a local exhibit last month and sold 3 paintings on the first day. Jason picked up one of the checks, his eyes wide at the amount. Mom, this is incredible. Then came commissions, people who want specific landscapes, memories of places where they were happy. I paused, looking directly at Stephanie. I heard you're having difficulties. I can help with the payments for a few months, until you get back on your feet. Stephanie's silence spoke volumes. Her eyes moved from the paintings to the checks, then to me, as if seeing a completely different person from the mother-in-law she knew. Brenda, we can't accept... Yes, you can. I interrupted with a firmness that surprised even me. That house exists because I sold mine to help you. I'm not going to let you lose it now. Jason had tears in his eyes. Stephanie remained silent, but something had shifted in her gaze. It wasn't the cold distance from before, but something more complex. Shame, perhaps, or respect, or a bewildering mix of both. The following week, I received a phone call I never expected. It was Stephanie, not Jason, on the other end. Brenda, it's Stephanie. Her voice sounded different, less assured, more hesitant. Hello, Stephanie. Did something happen? No, I mean, yes. We're having lunch on Sunday. The kids miss you. Could you come? I was silent for a moment, letting the unexpected invitation settle. Of course, I'd be happy to. Great. Jason will pick you up at 11. When I hung up, I stared at the phone, trying to understand what had changed. Was it the money? Probably in part. But there was something more in her voice, something I couldn't quite identify. On Sunday, Jason picked me up promptly. On the way, he talked about how he'd been able to renegotiate the debt with the bank, using the money I'd lent them. Mom, I don't know how to thank you. You saved our house. That's what family's for, son. When we arrived, I noticed immediate changes. There was a vase with fresh flowers on the coffee table, something I'd never seen on my previous visits. The house was impeccably tidy, and a delicious aroma wafted from the kitchen. Stephanie came to greet me at the door, her smile less forced than usual. Brenda, it's so good you came. The kids haven't stopped talking about you. As if they'd heard their names, Ethan and Chloe came running, hugging my legs so tightly I almost lost my balance. Grandma, come see my room. I cleaned it all up to show you my new books, Ethan exclaimed, pulling my hand. No, come see my drawings first, Chloe protested. Stephanie intervened with a gentleness that surprised me. Kids, let Grandma breathe. She'll have time to see everything, I promise. During lunch, the conversation flowed with a natural ease that hadn't existed before. Stephanie talked about job interviews she was having. Jason recounted a new project at work. The kids chatted about school, interrupting each other with typical childhood excitement. After dessert, an apple pie Stephanie had made especially because Jason mentioned it was my favorite. She invited me for a tour of the house. We made some changes I'd like to show you. I followed her, curious. The biggest surprise came when she opened the door to what used to be the office. The room was completely transformed. The computer desk had been moved to a corner, and in its place was a single bed, neatly made with new, colorful sheets. A small nightstand beside it held a picture frame with a photo of me and Arthur. I thought you might want to stay some weekends, Stephanie said, avoiding my gaze. "The kids miss you." I was speechless for a moment, looking at that space that had been prepared for me. The room where, before, there'd been no place for me. "Thank you, Stephanie," I finally replied. "But I'll only come if you let me teach Chloe how to paint. I think she's got talent." For the first time since I'd met her, I saw a genuine smile light up her face. "She'd love that. Actually," she hesitated for a moment, "I was really impressed by your paintings. I never imagined that you had that talent." "Me neither," I confessed. "Sometimes we discover things about ourselves when we least expect it." There was a moment of silence between us. Not the uncomfortable kind from before, but something more thoughtful, more contemplative. "Brenda, I wanted to apologize for the way I've treated you. It wasn't fair." I wasn't expecting that. In all the scenarios I'd imagined, an apology from Stephanie was never on the table. "What changed, Stephanie? Is it just because I can help out financially now?" She shook her head, her eyes downcast. "At first, maybe. But then, after I saw your paintings, I realized I never really knew you. I spent years only seeing the meddling mother-in-law I imagined you to be, not the person you really are." That conversation was the beginning of a slow but profound transformation. In the following weeks, I started spending more time at their house. Not as an occasional visitor, but as part of the family. A month after that Sunday, Jason showed up at my apartment with a surprise. He brought Ethan and Chloe, and all three were carrying bags of building supplies. "What's all this?" I asked, confused. Jason smiled, that boyish grin that always melted my heart. "We came to build you a real studio, Mom. This little corner of the living room is no place for an artist." They spent the weekend transforming the guest room I rarely used into a small studio. They installed shelves for my paints, a professional easel, a big table to work on. Jason even set up special lighting. "Now you can paint in comfort," he said, proud of his work. But the biggest surprise came a few weeks later. Stephanie landed a new job, even better than her old one. To celebrate, she invited me to a special dinner, just the two of us, at a restaurant. "I want to thank you for everything, Brenda. Not just the financial help, but for not giving up on our family, even when I made everything so difficult." During dinner, she told me about her own childhood, how she grew up with an extremely controlling mother who criticized everything she did. "When I married Jason, I swore I'd have total control over my house, my family, that no one would interfere like my mother did. When you came to stay with us temporarily, all those fears came rushing back. It wasn't you. It was the ghost of my own mother I was fighting." That confession explained so much. The refolded laundry, the rewashed dishes, the control over the kids' sugar intake. It wasn't against me. It was against her own demons. "I understand more than you think, Stephanie. I also had a complicated relationship with my mother-in-law. I promised myself I'd be different when it was my turn. But it's harder than it looks, isn't it?" She nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "When I saw your paintings, I realized you're a complete person, with your own talents and dreams. Not just a mother-in-law or a grandma, but a woman with a whole lifetime of experiences. That changed everything for me." 3 months after that restaurant conversation, I received a proposal that would change my life again. Jason and Stephanie showed up at my apartment one Sunday without the kids, with mysterious expressions. "Mom, we have an idea we'd like to discuss with you." We sat in the living room. and Jason began to explain. They were thinking of doing a small renovation in the back of the house, where there was a rarely used storage shed. We could turn that space into a studio for you, Mom. A place just for you in our home. Stephanie continued. You could stay with us during the week, help with the kids after school while we're working. Chloe's dying to learn to paint with you. And on weekends, if you prefer your privacy, you can go back to your apartment. I was speechless. It was so much more than I ever expected. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. Stephanie took my hands in hers, a gesture of intimacy that had never happened before. Brenda, you wouldn't be imposing anything. We're inviting you. We want you there. The kids need their grandma, and... She hesitated for a moment. I found I actually enjoy your company. 2 weeks later, I partially moved into their house. The small studio in the backyard Jason built for me became my sanctuary. A space just for me within the territory that had once been forbidden. Chloe proved to be an enthusiastic student. At 4 years old, she didn't care about techniques or rules, just the pure joy of splashing colors across the paper. Her freedom taught me to be less rigid with my own work. Grandma, you don't have to stay inside the lines. It's prettier when the color escapes, she told me one day, with the wisdom only children possess. The most surprising thing was when, one rainy afternoon, Stephanie timidly appeared at the studio door. Can I watch you two work? I've always been curious about painting. Of course she could. Soon she wasn't just observing, but participating. We discovered Stephanie had a natural talent for colors and composition. What started as curiosity transformed into passion. Today, 3 years after that night, I overheard, "You don't have a place here." I have more than one place. I have my apartment, where I spend some weekends when I need solitude. I have my studio in their backyard, where I paint almost every day. And I have a place at the dinner table, not as a visitor, but as an essential part of the family. Chloe, now 7, already sells her own canvases at school fairs. Her colorful, lively drawings stand out for the spontaneity only a child can possess. And Stephanie? She discovered in painting a way to process her own childhood traumas. Sometimes we spend entire afternoons side by side, in silence, just creating. In those moments, we're not mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, just two women sharing the same passion. On one of those afternoons, as we cleaned our brushes side by side, she made a confession to me. You know, Brenda, I always had this fear of becoming my mother, of being that controlling person who was never satisfied with anything. When you came to stay with us after your fall, I realized I was acting exactly like her. And now? I asked softly. Now I understand I can choose to be different, that I can learn new things like painting, that I can let the colors escape the lines, like Chloe says. I smiled, understanding perfectly what she meant. My secret wasn't just painting, but the discovery that, even at 67, I could still reinvent my life and, with that, transform the way others saw me. That it's never too late to find a new passion, a new skill, a new way to connect. Today, when I look back to that night I overheard through the thin wall that I had no place in that house, I no longer feel the sharp pain I felt then. I see that moment as the beginning of a journey that led me to discover not only the artist who existed within me, but also the strength I didn't even know I possessed. And when Stephanie introduces me to her friends as my mother-in-law, the artist, I know I've finally found my place. Not just a physical space, but a place of respect, mutual admiration, of true family. Because in the end, our places in the world aren't given to us. They're earned, built, sometimes painted with the colors we choose to use on the blank canvas that is life.